Well,
Okay.
welcome everyone to Ideas and Lives, which is a webcast and podcast about the arc of people's careers and their thoughts. And today we're very pleased to have um, Jim Paradis um, and, of course, my colleague Zvi Bodie. Hi, Zvi.
Hi, we have Jim Parody. What did you
Paradis. Sorry, I mispronounced your name.
you did?
But we'll remedy that as we go along.
Mm,
So welcome, Jim.
thank you. Yeah.
So we really we're going to just get started with where you grew up, uh, what was it like, where you grew up, and maybe something about what your parents did.
Okay. Well, I grew up in an unusual part of the country, far north in Minnesota. That's where I grew up, and that's where my childhood memories are. Uh, and the area of the state was up around Bemidji, Minnesota. I grew up on a large lake. It was a vast lake, and I have to say, the lake was really part of my life. And I realized that bigness is something that is a profound effect, has a profound effect on people. And my mother was a registered nurse. She worked at a sanatorium in Walker, Minnesota, which is where I grew up, the name of the town, which was a county seat for the county of Lewis Cass, Cass County in northern Minnesota. It's big, it's huge, vast areas. I think Minnesota is like the 12th largest state in the U.S. And it's a couple of times bigger than Maine. But my mother was a registered nurse who worked at the sanatorium, which was a state institution for tuberculosis. Um, and my father was a gas station owner and a landscape business. He had a business of landscaping. So, you know,
What wasn't it pretty cold out there?
it was really cold. Yeah, Judy always, my spouse, Judy, she always calls me a wuss. And, I say, why? Because I know what cold is, and she always finds me shrinking from cold, and the fact is I had 40 below weather sometimes when I went to
Wow.
school. Yeah, so it was
How
cold.
often was the lake? Well, the lake was frozen then for a
It
good.
was frozen in the winter. Yes, it was,
You
and
a
the ice
skater?
was. Yeah, I skated, but you could drive a car on the lake. The ice was that thick, so it was
Wow.
deep freeze up there in Minnesota.
And not many people probably, even though the land area is
Yeah,
extensive.
that is true. And the mines are in Hibbing, and all those big mines of iron ore are further further to the east of Cass County. So there was a fair amount of activity up there, uh, and there were Ojibwe people up there, people who had lived on the land for a long time, and many thousands of years probably.
Wow.
So it was interesting.
Did they have did they have a reservation?
Oh yes, they had Onigam Reservation. And I went back there a couple of summers ago with my sister, and we went out to the reservation, and they had traditional singing. and it was very interesting. It was really, there was an amazing culture there. So anyway, I grew up with kids who were Native American kids, and I was just a town kid. I hung out.
So how big was your high school?
The high school was probably about 1,000 kids total.
Oh, that big. Okay.
But it was my class was only 32, or it might have been. I'm guessing. So I don't have any numbers, but I would say it was probably a lot smaller. Probably about 500 kids. So,
Yeah.
so
And what were any highlights in high school?
what was the highlight of high school was my discovery of science, and for me, it was science and math. I was pretty interested in those subjects, and that's what led me to my interest in science and mathematics, and I was
And
pretty
led
good.
you to go to a university as
Yes, it led me to apply, and I was accepted at a liberal arts school, a Benedictine university, St. John's University in Minnesota. It's in Collegeville, and it was an interesting transformation for me because it was a lot of people who had a different focus than I did, coming from the north and coming down. And I got interested in science and theology there, science and religions, and that sort of the conflict and the tension between them. Um, that's what I got at St. John's University. And I got a good basic education, as they were in those days. But uh, it was an interesting experience for me. But
So you went there for 4 years?
I went there for 4 years. I graduated in something like 1964 or something like that. I don't know, a long time ago. So
And were there Native Americans in your high school and the college?
I met a lot of kids from South America, but not Native Americans. But they may have been there, and I wasn't aware of it. Uh, we had quite a variety of students, quite a diverse student body. But
Was further south than where you grew up?
yeah, yeah, it was the native, the Onigum, the tribal areas, the reservations were far north, um, because the Native Americans were pushed out of the southern part of the state. So
And after college, then what did you do and what were you?
after college, I went to the Peace Corps, and I was in the Peace Corps a couple of years, and I was in Ethiopia, and I came back. I taught science. My undergraduate degree at St. John's was in chemistry and biology and chemistry. It was a minor in chemistry, so I was interested in the life sciences. So uh, partly from the influence of the big north, there's a lot of natural space up there, and people become interested in those sorts of things, and I certainly did. Um, so after I graduated from St. John's,
You
I
went straight
graduated.
into the Peace Corps?
I went into the Peace Corps because I was really concerned about the assassination of JFK, and it bothered me. But I also have a interest in doing some kind of service and like to dedicate myself to things. And the Peace Corps was a challenge to get into, but they accepted me and they sent me off to Africa. And I didn't even know uh, where Ethiopia was on the map. I had to get out a geography and look at it and find where they were sending me. But then after the other thing I did after I returned was I got a master's at New York University, NYU, in American literature. And then I went out to the University of Washington in Seattle to study and got a PhD in English and
Well,
English literature. And
yeah, well, but before you get to that, what can you give us any highlights from your Peace Corps days? What was Ethiopia like? What was teaching like there?
well, Ethiopia was a fascinating country. It had a long history that I only partially understood, but I did a lot of I had a lot of students who were fascinating, and they were from different parts. It's a big country.
Yeah,
Uh, they're like 20, 40 million people there, and it's also had a lot of history of conflict
right.
between Ethiopia and Eritrea. Uh, and I met a lot of people from the Middle East who were doing service in Ethiopia, and there were other people traveling. And, I got a lot out of it just by understanding what the what the populations in Africa were like. And, just, from northern Minnesota to Africa, it's like, you can take the whole United States and put it into North Africa and, and have land left over.
Yeah,
It's huge.
but
So
it's a Christian country.
they
As
were Coptic Christians, but they also had a lot of Islam, Muslims. The city that I was in was Harar, Ethiopia. And they also had Falasha Jews, and a lot of Jews were Falasha people were accepted into Israel as native Jews. I think they were pre-Talmudic Jews. I don't know all the particulars, but it's a pretty interesting history. But the main religion of Ethiopia was the Coptic Church, and it was a Byzantine church, and it was associated with the Egyptian church and the church in
yeah,
Istanbul.
yeah.
So there's a long and complicated history there too.
And what motivated you to pursue literature after that science effort? You were
Uh,
good in science,
I
but you
got really
decided not to
interested.
stay in science.
I got really interested in literature and the tension between literature and science. That became my focus. And at St. John's University as an undergraduate, I never understood that there was a tension between anything. I didn't grasp the idea that there are tensions in ideas rumbling beneath the surface of culture. And that's something that I became fascinated with. And I became basically, I trained as a PhD student. I became interested in the history of communication,
Mm,
and that's where I got interested in T.H. Huxley. Is he was writing about communication and the ways in which science is useless unless it gets communicated to a larger public, and people understand what the basis of their their culture and society is, and so on and so forth. So that became fascinating to me. So that's what I studied literature. I moved over to literature because the history. I was more interested in prose writing in the 19th century, and um, the history of origins of prose writing, and so
And then so you went out to Washington. So that's a big shift. You went from one coast to the other.
yes, yeah, that
Somebody
was
from the middle of the country.
yeah, that's a huge that's a huge shift. Uh, and I really liked Seattle, and I said to Judy, who I met in New York and got married. My Judy, her maiden name was Schmuckler, and she took my last name, and I said to her, I said, this is really a bigger shift than uh, you probably expected. And she said, yes, it was a big shift, and she adjusted. We both adjusted quite well. So
She had grown up in New York.
she'd grown up in New Rochelle. So she grew up in Westchester, New York, just north of New York City, and
So,
Jewish family.
hmm. So how did you what particular areas did you focus on in grad school? And what did you write in terms of a dissertation?
my dissertation was on T.H. Huxley. So I just got so fascinated with Huxley and the whole problem of communicating science. There's a real problem in transforming science into communication mode, and it's 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 uh, it's a challenge that I became fascinated in, and I worked on T.H. Huxley because I identified with Huxley as a person who wrote about science in the 19th century context as a cultural phenomenon, and he wrote his lay sermons, and he wrote his publications were meant for the for an audience of people who didn't know a lot about science. So he tried to write about science in a way that would interest the common person, the person in the street. And I became very interested in that set of ideas, and this whole idea of communicating science to a broader public. And I realized, and I think with Huxley taught me um, how important this aspect of science is in communicating science. And so that's
What
why
were some of his big areas of science that he did want to communicate?
he was an invertebrate scientist, and he went on a voyage parallel to Charles Darwin's voyage of the Beagle. In Huxley's case, it was the voyage of the HMS Rattlesnake, and he studied invertebrate populations in the South Seas, in Oceania, and off close to Indonesia, and he organized this in a book that he wrote that was I forget the title of it, but it was titled Invertebrate Species or something like that, in the history and order of invertebrate species, something like that.
So it was especially biology and
Yeah,
to
so
some
he
extent
was a
evolution.
biologist, yes, yes, and he understood the biology in a broad way, and he was nominated and accepted to the Royal Society when he was still in his 20s as a result of his publication of his invertebrate study. And then he went on to write other books, including Man's Place in Nature, which was one of the big books that he co-authored. And his issue, his recommendation was that people had to understand the natural world and understand the dynamics of the natural world in order to provide a foundation for their own lives. And he didn't say the natural world was a model for their own lives, but he said that understanding the principles of nature was a critical aspect of getting some kind of idea for how you would structure your laws. And so.
And then was your very first teaching job at MIT?
I got hired at MIT as a result of a national search. Somebody told me at the University of Washington, and I looked around and I thought, I might be one of the few people here as a result of a national search. But I was interviewed by a circle of people, and I don't know, the people who interviewed me. I was looking for jobs. I graduated in 1964 or something like that.
No, from college you graduated in 64,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So you must have graduated from grad
So
school.
yeah, I came to MIT in 1977. So I graduated with my PhD in 76.
Mhm.
So I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, there probably aren't a lot of people who were very good in science like you were, and were also very good in literature, albeit you were mostly interested in prose literature.
I was interested in prose literature, and I was interested in science communication, and those are the courses that I taught. I taught science communication. I taught a course in Darwin and design, and I was interested in these ideas and the
Had you
broad.
always wanted to be an academic, or
Uh, I
probably
always
back in
agree.
Minnesota, you might not have thought of that?
I don't think I thought of college academia, but I thought of education as a way of self-transforming for people. And I thought, that's a really important principle. And I always thought that that was a critical function of education is to build yourself into something of a different type of person who could tell people, help people solve problems. And that was my core idea. So anyway.
So between the late 60s and when you got your PhD in Washington, what were you doing? Did you teach in Washington at all?
I taught some in New York City. I taught a little bit. That's why I got my master's at NYU. And I came back from the Peace Corps, and I decided to I had to make a living. So making a living one way was the school board of New York City interviewed me, and they had a summer program, and I was interviewed, and I was placed at a public school, and I learned about you know people who were trying to transform themselves, who were immigrants and were coming into the city. The school that I taught in was primarily Hispanic, but so I learned a lot about the immigration population. And of course, we're all immigrants. You know, everybody in the U.S. is an immigrant. So,
except for the Native Americans,
well, they're probably
immigrants
more
from some
ancient,
places.
more ancient
More
immigrants.
ancient immigrants.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You know, everybody's into this immigration game. Uh, but you know, trying to improve your life is, you know, it's just human nature.
Yeah.
Just yeah. So anyway, I learned about a lot of I learned a lot from my students. They were very they were very fresh, but they were hampered by not being able to speak the language,
Mm.
and their their issues were common issues that anybody who immigrates has from another culture, and so it was interesting to be part of that.
So
And
did you teach biology or?
I taught general science and, you know, earth science and that sort of thing. It was a junior high
Mhm.
school, and you know, that's what I did. So
How did it compare to the teaching in Ethiopia?
uh, the teaching in Ethiopia was at a teacher training institute, and my students were a little more advanced, and
Mm.
but they had issues with. I taught in English as a Peace Corps member. That's what we adopted. That practice. But so you know, I think the Ethiopian students were very diligent and very they worked very hard, and so were the New York City students, very diligent and very hardworking. But they
You
really
didn't have to motivate them.
a little bit, but I don't know how good a job I did, but you know, uh, I had to motivate through some effort to get people interested in the subject, and you know, provide some sort of background that would enable people to understand the context. So
So tell us about your early years at MIT and what you were thinking about and writing about. You had already done your
yeah.
dissertation on T.H. Huxley. What else did you work on?
Yeah, so T.H. Huxley was really important to me at MIT because T.H. Huxley focused on the very problems that I encountered at MIT. When I first came to MIT, there were no laptops, no personal computers, and so I saw the emergence of DEC and DEC or DEK and Wang computers, and you know, all these things, and Apples, of course, and all this. And I didn't realize I was watching history, you know, take shape. But the experience of being at MIT in those days, in 1977, I came to MIT in 77. That date is in here. Uh, uh, it was a pale version of itself, in the contemporary age. I don't know. It probably pale is probably the wrong word, but
Yeah.
it wasn't quite as intense.
Mhm.
But it was an interesting place. I got pulled into a project. I did a lot of teaching. I used to teach communicating science and engineering, and this is one of the first. These were some of the earliest classes in technical communication, uh, communicating about science and engineering for a non-technical crowd. And so I used to teach students in those classes, and I had a lot of students who were working on various types of projects, and you know, it was a challenge for them to try to create prose that would communicate with a broader audience. And so it was an interesting struggle, and I learned a lot from that process. And I used to teach in a co-op, what they call the co-op program. I used to teach communication uh, units in in various departments, including aero and astro, mechanical engineering, earth and planetary science. I taught a lot of,
So I recall, actually, it was the summer before I started Brandeis in 1961,
yeah,
a book called The Two Cultures in the Scientific Revolution. I assume you're familiar with that book.
yes.
And
See, no, yes,
it it
yeah,
it sort of was illustrative of something that I think in a way we still have kind of two cultures
yeah,
that was identified way back in the 1950s and
yeah,
early 1960s.
yeah,
Um, so you had a real task there.
yeah, I did. I used to teach a class titled "Reading Climate Through Media," and that class was focused on some of these issues. We have to understand climate. The science is really really important. We see a lot of examples of bad economics, and in today's administration, all the stuff that's being done with tariffs and so on and so forth, and you
Yeah,
understand who's in charge here. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So the science is important to understand, and climate is another issue, is a bigger issue, and it's going to affect us all. But we're doing bad things to the the environment, and we have to address those issues. And part of that addressing them is understanding the economics and understanding the science, and how economics is a science, but it's just trying to understand what's going on in the
So
background.
but you wrote some additional books beyond Huxley. Tell us about those.
Uh, I wrote a book on Victorian science and Victorian letters, literary perspectives, uh, and I'm getting the title
Yeah,
mixed up here.
we don't need the title, but go
Okay.
ahead.
Victorian science, Victorian culture, literary perspectives, and what I explored in that volume was the issues that have to do with uh, the different perspectives that people bring uh, to culture, and think of culture as the norm. And you have to blend things with it, other understandings with it. So you have to get a deeper understanding of culture than just what the cultural performers say. So other papers that I did a paper on Darwin and Charles Darwin and landscape. I was very interested in Darwin's idea of the uh, the natural world, and how he tried to incorporate the natural world into his writings. And he was fascinated with it. But this was partly on his voyage to on the Beagle, and so he
How good is the prose in The Origin of Species that Darwin?
Origin of Species is a very well written book, but it has some issues. it's very ambitious, and people struggle with understanding its ideas, its critical ideas, especially survival of the fittest, and how that can how passive performance of evolution, and the fact that evolution is largely the product of struggling for existence, and having changes in your makeup and passing those along that improve your performance in the real world, and passing those changes in your genetic structure onto your offspring. So it's a slow process. And so one of the things was Stephen Jay Gould came up with this idea, was the idea of deep time. People had not thought of time in millions of years, and they didn't know how to think of that dimension of evolution. And I think Darwin was a little casual in making his arguments, and hoping that everyone could, and hoping that other people could come along and understand them. So
Did you interact much with the science professors at MIT, and
I
how
actually
did that
did.
influence your own teaching?
I did a fair amount with that program, where I used to teach communication units in core classes in the various scientific departments, and I learned a lot about the MIT structure. I used to even do a computer science. I don't know if I taught something that Chris took, but I was thinking, Chris he was a graduate of MIT. And so I used to teach occasionally 6001. There were courses in the communication. There were courses with dimensions on communication in computer science, and which is course 6. So I learned a lot about the way in which different people provide education at MIT. And all the professors agreed, communication is critical, but I don't know exactly.
Well, you wouldn't know that from a lot of the way people write journal articles,
Yeah.
but
that
but
is
they're
true.
writing for themselves, and they're writing for
And they're
their
writing for their colleagues, and
peers.
that's one of my issues with climate, is people publish all these important papers, but they publish them for audiences in journals that are read by very narrow audiences. But
Yeah.
Now, you also uh, developed developed the department that you became the head of.
I
Why
did.
don't you talk about that?
Well, this was a department that was focused on communication, but there was a group that began to focus on media, and they developed a program in comparative media studies. And then their main developer left MIT for USC or someplace out in California, and it made a lot of sense. But they were trying to figure out what to do with that department and that unit. And I said, writing is about media. Writing is a form of media, and all of the major media, telegraph and television and film, they all use scripts, and writers are the foundation, are the central part of this. And so let's just join forces and put these two units together. And that developed into CMSW, comparative media studies and writing. So I was involved in working alongside, working with that and developing that program. So, so my main function was to pull them together and put them in. They had two budgets, and I had a administrative officer who was very talented, and she figured out how to do the budgets, and it was a complicated process, but putting it together was a very good thing to do because it still
There
functioned.
were there were some courses in the history of science too, right?
Yes. I had a historian of science in my faculty in the program in writing and humanistic studies. Ken Manning, who was he was a historian, a African American historian, and he focused on African Americans' contributions to science. And he wrote a big book that was Pulitzer nominee. Was about E. Just, who was a very important scientist. I think he was a physiologist, but I can't remember his field. But yeah, so there were historians of science in the program. We had a quite diverse program. We had authors, we had poets, we had writers like Junot Diaz. We had I don't know. We just had writers and producers who did films and biographies and all kinds of different things. So we were focused on media and writing, and we had a number of poets. There are a lot of MIT students who are interested in poetry, producing poetry.
Wow.
So we always try to provide resources for those students because it's a way of engaging from a science background with the world. It's an opening into, it's a window into the world, and reading great works of literature, studying economics or studying political science is also about the world, the world at large. So MIT students are benefited by having avenues to do those kinds of studies.
So I put in a question about the state of humanities education at the college level today. Now, we don't, a lot of schools are not MIT,
Yeah,
and there's been a lot of controversy, I would say, about
yeah,
humanities programs writ large in universities, that they've declined and become a bit more ideological, let's say.
yeah.
Did you have any experience with that, or do you have any views on it?
Well, I understand the ideological perspective, and I think people should try to avoid that. And I used to say to my students, if you can tell whether I believe in God or not, I'll give you an A. I'll give you a
Yeah.
higher grade. But I think people should learn. I think that's part of teaching is learning how to provide a broad perspective that does not have a political spin or a religious spin, and try to approach things in a non denominational approach. So that's my sense. I think humanities it's a mistake to throw the humanities out. I don't know if universities are doing that, but they should be getting students into the mode of interacting around subjects that have to do with things that are in the outside world, and in the real world. And I think the humanities are an avenue, are an important, and the arts are an important avenue to what's human about the world, and the better part of humanity. And so
Yeah.
I'm a big supporter, but I do think that people should avoid, part of the teaching should be trying to create a sense of neutrality and openness and discussion. Just let's not.
Were most of the people that took those courses non-majors, or did you have some majors?
Almost all of them were majors.
Oh,
Yeah,
majors.
yeah. Occasionally there would be a humanities major, but most of the people who come to MIT are science and engineering majors, and they're focused on their field of
Yeah,
study.
and then they would take your courses.
They might take my course, and they have to take a certain number of humanities courses to graduate. So I'm for that kind of approach
Yeah.
to make people engage with subjects that are outside of their majors and maybe less comfortable for them. But it's part of education. Education is trying to get people to expand their points of view and their I don't know, their experience, and providing windows to the outside world is an important part of that, that whole process.
Well, Jim, you moved from upper Minnesota to Cambridge, Massachusetts. Of course, that move was many years ago.
Yeah, it was. But
And what from your old Minnesota roots do you think you stuck with? Was it
I
that
think
sense of
uh,
fairness?
I think that's part of the Minnesota view is, it's trying to be a responsible citizen.
Yeah.
So I don't know how to put it, but it is a big transformation. It's a shift, and I always think of myself as as somebody who just slipped into this mode or that mode, and I went to the Peace Corps, and I met graduates from Dartmouth and Princeton and all the different places, the big schools, and I always try to step back and get some kind of perspective on things. And I would say I have a Minnesota perspective. I don't think of myself as a raving genius. I don't think of I think of myself as a good, solid, ordinary person.
Not
And so,
as an elite Eastern,
yeah, I don't think of, you know,
yeah.
I, I think more people at MIT would probably be a good idea, but MIT has a lot of first generation students, and a lot of students there are not people who are from the privileged.
I think, compared to a lot of universities, especially in the Boston area, MIT is less ideological in terms of,
I think it is, yeah.
although it did have a few problems this past couple of years, but
It's had a few problems, but I don't think it's generated those problems. I think the problems are the things that people want to put on MIT. I won't name names, but I think MIT is a pretty broad place. And it's got a basic understanding and trust for data and understanding the situation. as it has a Jewish president, and for better or for worse, she's the real deal, and she's very talented and smart.
That's good. Well, as Tzvi and I are both graduates of MIT, so we're
Oh
happy
boy,
to hear
well,
that.
yeah, that's good. Yeah. So I love MIT. MIT is just life. It's just what people are trying to do and understanding a little better what the situation is, and MIT is something that Huxley would definitely have approved of. It might do things a little differently than what is possible in England, but it's going for the same things. So,
What's your, we're coming toward the end here. Um, you've talked a lot about writing, and of course, now there's a lot of issues about large language models and other artificial intelligence
yeah,
vehicles that um, do some writing for people.
yeah.
Do you have any perspective on how that will?
Uh, it should be said that I I realized that GPT was available, and I told my students, you can use it however you want, but just cite it. Just give me a citation.
Mhm.
What you used, and But now it's getting a little crazy. So I was talking to somebody the other night, and uh, Lee Bowman down the street, and he was saying, AI is a big danger. And but I retired a year ago last fall, so it's not so much my problem in the sense that it's something that I have to deal with on a daily basis. But I would say that this is a problem. And my next door neighbor said, he used to have people doing internships, and he would have them do papers, and he's in medical business, and he said now he can just get the same thing from Chat GPT. So that was just a driveway conversation, but I thought, this is really something that humans have to take seriously. And a lot of the large language models uh, were contributed to by people at MIT. So there's something. Artificial intelligence lab is at MIT. They used to have what they called good old fashioned AI, and that was the AI, the kind of AI that swept your floors and did answer the phone or something like that. But anyway, so it's gotten a lot worse, and I think really intelligent people have to sit down and do something about this. But I'm not. I know that writing is something, and my wife, who was doing a seder the other night, and she said she had a number of poems during the course of the meal, and one of them was written by uh, AI. She mentioned it just in passing, and I thought, well, that really says something. Here we are at a seder, and we're getting a poem from we were collectively reading it, and so I
Yeah.
don't know. We have to think about
Well,
it.
yeah, we'll have Jewish AI, but um,
I
we,
do think Bob, that we have to do something about this. We have to somehow focus on putting together resources to control and channel this process. But I think it may be out of the bag now, but I don't know. I don't know exactly where. I'm focused on the other big problem, which is climate,
Yeah.
and I think that's something that with AI emerging, maybe AI can solve the climate issue.
Yeah,
There you
maybe.
go.
Yeah.
Zvi,
So
you have some final thoughts and questions?
Well, I thank my neighbor, Jim. We've known each other for decades now,
mm,
and we celebrate Passover together. I was at that Seder that
Mm,
he's
mm.
talking about.
yeah.
So I appreciate his, you know, you started out, Jim, by saying, even before we were recording this, that you don't remember very much, but you gave us a fairly complete account
Yeah.
of the arc of your career.
Yeah. Thank you.
We appreciate it. So thank you very much, Jim, and it's been a pleasure learning about your career, learning about you, learning about your thoughts. Um, and speaking of climate, an economist that's good friends with both Tzvi and I, Robert Pindyke. Uh,
Pindyke, yes. I've read his book.
he has a very interesting book, and
Yeah.
that may be a good suggestion for us to move on
Yeah.
to Dr.
Yeah.
Pindyke for a
Do you
future
have
ideas.
Pindyke interview with Pindyke?
We have not interviewed him yet,
Yeah.
but
He'd be
there's
excellent.
always the
Yeah.
future, and
Yeah.
I did read his book on climate, so
Yeah.
it was an interesting
Yeah.
interesting
Yeah.
book.
It's a powerful piece.
Yeah,
Uh, there are a number of other people who are of course economists who've thought about these issues and
absolutely. Yeah,
are trying to grapple with them. And you know, uh, who's that guy at Yale? What's his name?
Bill Nordhaus.
Nordhaus. Yes, Nordhaus. Yeah.
He was my quarterback when I played pickup football at MIT. We had a
Wow.
flag football uh, team, intramural football team at MIT, and he was the quarterback.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
So he was a year ahead. But yeah, he has made
He's
some.
written a couple of
He won
books.
a Nobel
And
Prize in that field. So
and somebody was laughing at him, and I said, "Don't laugh." Somebody in my class was making fun of him, and I said, "Here's a guy who actually takes the time out from his professional life to write about public issues that have to do with that are critical to us, and you know, to everybody." And Pindyke, uh, not Pindyke, but Nordhaus.
yeah,
Nordhaus really takes time and cultivates and dedicates time to those kinds of.
yes, absolutely.
Yes, he does. He actually took over uh, the textbook, Samuelson's textbook in economics.
Yeah.
Samuelson turned it over to him.
Okay. Well, that's
Well,
good.
again, thanks a lot, Jim, and hope you're enjoying your retirement. You
Okay.
deserve it for
I'm
all
feeling a
those.
little guilty, Bob, but you know,
Don't feel guilty.
I'm not doing enough.
Okay. Well, one thing you can do is watch previous episodes of
Okay.
Ideas and Lives, and you'll hear a lot of other interesting people and you've certainly contributed your share to our
Okay.
series. So
Well,
thanks again, and we'll be signing off uh,
okay.
now. And
You take care.
Thanks very much. Let's see.